Welcome to this talk, folks, on Fianna Fáil, the De Valera government from 1932 to 39. This is very much a companion to the Comna Gael Cosgrave chapter of previous ones. I'm going to start off here looking at exam questions, first of all, then a brief background to the arrival of De Valera in March of 1932 as leader of the country, and then going into Anglo-Irish relations. Following on from that, then later on in videos, we will look at the society and economic situation as well, and then finish up with just some other issues in relation to security, such as the IRA, blue shirts, that kind of thing. And then we'll recap again on the exam quiz. So just looking at the previous ones last year, as we can see in 2019, there was a question on Anglo-Irish relations developing during the period 23 to 39. Again, this would involve a knowledge of both Comna Gael following on from the treaty, the Comna Gael Anglo-Irish issues such as the Boundary Commission, Ireland's position within Dominion status, and then very much going into De Valera's dismantling of the treaty throughout the 1930s, which we look at. And then you'd want to put a bit on as well about Ireland during the war and its relationship with Britain, Churchill in particular, concluding them with the Republic of Ireland Act in 1949. But we'll get to those later on in other talks. 2018 then, you had a very unique question, first time ever asked. During the period 1922 to 45, how effective were the governments of both Cosgrave and De Valera in dealing with the threat to security to the state? This is actually quite a good question. You could go from Cosgrave, first of all, I suppose, the post-Civil War situation, the establishment of law and order with the Gardaí, the army mutiny threat. You could then also go on into De Valera's Fianna Fáil period then, looking at things like the IRA threat in the 1930s, and indeed the blue shirts. And following on from that, then going into the whole issue of defence, I suppose, into World War II during the emergency. So that's quite a big span of a question, but actually not a bad question. The first time it ever came up, it could come up again. We'll wait and see. 2017, then again, you have the Anglo-Irish Relations question, slightly different here in that it doesn't include the war. It just goes in from 1922, I suppose, post-treaty into De Valera, or Cosgrave, I should say, the Anglo-Irish policy there, and then on to De Valera, and probably a bit more of a, I suppose, a wider discussion of his dismantling of the treaty. So, I mean, if you're proportioning that essay, it's probably 1/3 Cosgrave, the rest De Valera, and you're making the point, I suppose, that De Valera was far more successful when it came to Anglo-Irish achievements in that regard. 2016, this is definitely one I'd watch for this year perhaps as well. A question about the economy, social and economic problems that faced both governments. Again, Comna Gael from 23 to 32, involving things like agriculture, industry, the issue of tariff protection, and the same thing again then with Fianna Fáil throughout the 1930s, looking at agriculture. And within that, then you're also including the economic war, and also into industry, semi-state bodies, and then you'd want a bit on the war economy as well, the whole Sean Lemass thing, I suppose, Department of Supplies, etc. And you could sprinkle that as you go along as well with social issues, housing, things like the Shannon scheme, even with electrification, that kind of a thing itself. But we'll come back to that later on when we look at economic and social policy under Fianna Fáil. 2015 and 14, we have no document, we have no questions, I should say, because this section was the documents question. So you have to go back to 2013 again, and a bit like the last question there's a question on the Irish economy, just going up until 1939 though, so you would not have to put in an involvement in the war economy, maybe a bit more focus on things like the economic war, industry, agriculture, that kind of a thing. The old reliable of Anglo-Irish relations again comes up in 2013. So there's actually two questions that year spanning the Comna Gael and Fianna Fáil topics. So you'd really want to know these two topics, certainly going into this section. 2012, again, you have the Anglo-Irish relations, pretty much word perfect to the 2019 question in relation to the span of the question from 23 up until the Republic of Ireland Act of 1949. Then we're going back to 2011, the strengths and weaknesses of De Valera as a political leader. Now, there's no time frame on this question. In theory, you could start from 1916 if you wanted, from the rising into the by-election successes, the taking over of Sinn Féin from 1917 onwards, even into the treaty negotiations, his role there. Or I think you could just go straight to 1932, March of that year, when he became, I suppose, president of the Executive Council, or as we would call Taoiseach, and just focus on that time period from 1932 even up until 1939. Some would go on into the war economy and into the relations with Britain during the war as well, perhaps. Again, there is no time frame on this question. It doesn't state any time frame, so you can be the master of that question as such. Then 2010, again, another similar question in relation to Anglo-Irish relations spanning both Cosgrave and De Valera, and I think we've covered that already, who handled it better. 2009, you have a question on De Valera, and it's a mixture. It's very much on the economy and Anglo-Irish relations, which did he manage better? So you could spend some time looking at the economy, industry, agriculture, protectionism, the war economy, if you wanted to, and then talk about Anglo-Irish relations. That's all dismantling the treaty up to and including relations with Churchill in World War II. 2008 then, a kind of a broad question here. What steps did Irish governments take to consolidate democracy from 23 to 45? I mentioned this, I think, before in the Comna Gael chapter. You can interpret this question in many ways. How do you consolidate democracy? Is it economic policy? Is it security? Is it Anglo-Irish policy? You could argue it's all of the above. So you could make that question work for you. And again, going back to 2007, then you have Anglo-Irish relations again coming up between 23 and 49. So really, if you look at it, the main questions here have been Anglo-Irish relations, the economy, one question on security, a question on De Valera's strengths and weaknesses as a leader. They're kind of the dominant ones, and that question there about the consolidation of democracy. A lot of these questions involve both the Comna Gael Cosgrave chapter and the De Valera Fianna Fáil chapter, so they really do complement each other extremely well in this section. And virtually every year there's been a question on one, if not both of them. Right, so we'll move on and we'll look at the background here for a few minutes. This is the kind of the arrival of De Valera. As we mentioned previously, Fianna Fáil had been established in 1926 following another split in Sinn Féin. This time they were going to go in and take their seats in the Dáil, and they're forced to take the oath of allegiance in 1927 after Cosgrave's Electoral Amendment Act, following on from the assassination of Kevin O'Higgins. And then for the next 5 years, there was kind of proper opposition there. Fianna Fáil were opposing Comna Gael in a proper democratic system. You also had them from the outside as well through the Irish Press newspaper, and they were gaining more and more support through very, very well organised local branches or commons right throughout the country, really much appealing to the smaller farmers, the urban working classes. Fianna Fáil gained 72 seats in the 1932 election. It's not a majority, however, with the support of Labour from outside, he was nominated as Taoiseach with 81 votes and had come to the election very much of, I suppose, two main things: the abolition of the oath of allegiance and, I suppose, wider Anglo-Irish relations and dismantling the treaty, and also retaining the land annuity payments to Britain, which we'll talk about in our discussion on the economy when we get to the economic war. So very much heading towards republic. I suppose if Comna Gael were a conservative government, this was more of a kind of a nationalist republic government, very much about trying to assert Irish sovereignty and pursuing that in a far more vigorous way perhaps than Cosgrave and the Comna Gael government had done in the previous decades. The culmination of this, I suppose, would be the dismantling of the treaty, the signing up of a new constitution, Bunreacht na hÉireann, in 1937, and really by 1939, all but a republic, all but a name. And there you can see some of the figures in the cabinet. There's De Valera sitting in the front centre. Okay, just above and to the right, you have there Sean Lemass, second from the right. Sean T. O'Kelly is there as well, Sean McEntee, Frank Aiken, and others. And again, it's advisable to some of the players in this. De Valera was what we would call Taoiseach, or then President of the Executive Council, a term that was used up until 1937. And he also took over the portfolio of Minister for External Affairs, what we call Foreign Affairs today, very much with the mindset of dealing with the Anglo-Irish relationship. That was his baby, and he was going to dismantle the treaty. So he took full control of that brief. And there's the man at work. Right, other players in the cabinet that you should be aware of: Sean T. O'Kelly, Vice President, or Tánaiste they would call it today. Sean McEntee would be there in finance. Sean Lemass in industry and commerce. Frank Aikens, James Ryan in agriculture. They'll be the main players here, and these are names you need to sprinkle into an essay, be it on the economy or Anglo-Irish relations along the way. So now we're going to focus on Anglo-Irish relations, and this is something that we'll look at in the second video. So if you've been following this so far, you'll see a follow-up to this in the next video clip. So click onto that part 2 of Fianna Fáil, and I'll focus specifically on Anglo-Irish relations.